Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, an inspired conversation space between Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner on the journey of motherhood through the common thread of parenting, relationship, and sexuality as a path to consciousness.
We keep our conversations honest, our experiences real, and our philosophies exploratory. We believe that in order to raise incredible humans, we first have to raise ourselves. We know that in order to rock the family, you've got to nourish the mother. If you are here, you care about paving a path of conscious and intentional motherhood, connected with yourself and your gifts, and also illuminating your children in theirs so we may raise more whole humans who can impact this world in a more humane way.
If you desire to integrate your learnings practically and supportively, head on over to bridgetwood.life or julietenner.love to go deeper. And for all live-streamed pre-release podcasts and all our free content, head over to our free Facebook group, Nourishing the Mother with Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner. We are Julie Tenner and Bridget Wood, and we are so grateful you're here.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today's podcast is Motherhood as a Rite of Passage, which, Bridgie, you and I cannot get enough of talking about because we see it as so hugely impactful and such an enormous imprint or footprint, if you like, on the experience that that woman then carries forward for the rest of her life.
Gosh, it's just so true. And I think it also speaks to how, for both of us, pregnancy and birth has also been such a huge love of both of us, because it's really a time that opens up, really we're wide open to that rite of passage. But that's not where it begins and ends. And I love that we're having this conversation because there are little points throughout our mothering journey that we are offered opportunity to grasp it as a rite of passage and to undo ourselves in order to be more and expand who we are as mothers and in turn what we give our children. So I'm really excited about this conversation.
Me too. I just really want to highlight at the start of this that this is relevant for all of us because we're humans having a human experience. And as such, a rite of passage is just a really old word that says, I wish to honor and celebrate this enormous cracking open and change and reconciliation of this entire human. So there's a death and there's a rebirth, and then there's this space in between those two. And that's essentially what we're referring to as a rite of passage. So yes, we're talking about it today in the context of motherhood, but what you will hear is the why, what it looks like to be integrated and supported, and what it looks like to be unintegrated and unsupported. And you can apply that to any major change in your life whatsoever. So whether you are a mother, aren't a mother, are trying to be a mother, find yourself in the space of not wanting to be a mother, wherever you are, forget the part that says motherhood and just insert major change or transition or challenge in my life. And the same principles will apply.
I love that you've said that. Yeah.
So let's begin with why motherhood is a rite of passage.
Well, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, well, first of all, on a biological level, I cannot get past the fact that that period of matrescence, which is essentially what we begin when we first have a baby, and can last up to beyond even the first 7 years. But that early period of pregnancy and birth, we go through more hormonal change than the period of adolescence. And we all know what adolescence feels like. But we understand, as a culture, as a society, we tend to understand that adolescence is enormously transformative and sticky and icky and awkward and hard. And we try to have reverence for that. But how much do we actually really allow the reverence and the holding and the support purely just for the biological piece of transformation that motherhood does, and therefore, of course, changes everything. I mean, if your brain's changing that much, then your whole identity is shifting. You're nothing like who you were before, but yet we try to clutch onto that. And that can be where so many women, I think, come undone.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because when you and I were talking about this earlier, you were saying you literally are literally recreating your entire life. Like your body is your life. You're literally recreating your body by virtue of the changes that happen during matrescence.
Yeah.
Like, it's extraordinary. And I have the deepest compassion for my teenagers when I'm like, you are literally reminding your entire self. Like, the amount of cellular death, renewal, and creation that happens, they end up with like 30% of the brain that they've had. No wonder they appear to be toddlers.
Yeah.
And then I think,
you probably have to remind yourself of that multiple times a day, right? Like, that's
no, I legit do. It's the weirdest thing. I know I'm digressing, but I'll just say how weird it is, because there's literally these huge, enormous bodies. And I'm going, have you taken your backpack as you headed out the door? Oh, yeah, I'm going, have you got your shoes on? Like, it's like a toddler. It's like the most bizarre thing. And then I think about how it felt to feel like my brain had left my body with my placenta. I saw this mum before we went into our last lockdown. I saw this beautiful mum at school who just had a baby, and she was like, oh my God, I don't know what has happened to my brain. I don't know where anything is. I can't remember anything. And she was just recounting that part that I have the deepest, softest compassion for, because I remember what that feels like to go, hang on a minute. I was this hugely articulate, intelligent woman in the world who could validate the space and the time that she was in. And now I'm like, feeling so stupid and insignificant. Yeah. What has happened to me? Yeah. And there's part of me that goes, good Lord, is this ever coming back? Like, I can't remember the thing I walked into this room for. I can't tell, like, your brain leaves, but it's because of what you're saying. You are literally recreating your brain and your physiology and your cells and your neurochemistry and your hormones, just as you remind and remake your body in adolescence. God. Like, it's really profound, isn't it?
It's really, really huge, and yet so under supported, under recognized. And so we go around thinking we're stupid and can't keep up, or are somehow, lacking.
Yeah, exactly. I would like to tell you your brain does come back. So hang in there, because I promise you that it does, even if you're in that phase and you're worried about it. The other why motherhood is a rite of passage is the enormous body change. So we've just talked about it on a physical or biochemical level, but there's also my entire body has grown another body, has birthed another body, and now I'm left with this in between, the growing of another body, the birthing of another body, and not the body that I've always known and lived in up until this point in time. And I think that that's a really vulnerable, uncertain place to be. It's like, an animal shedding its skin, or a butterfly opening the cocoon where its wings are still wet and it has to wait for them to dry, and it's at its most vulnerable because it can't move, and it, all of the things, it's not ready to be fully fledged in the world. And I often think that's what it's like to live in the postpartum body, where you're not. Sometimes I think I don't know about you, Bridge, but I feel like I'm walking around in a body that's not even mine.
You kind of almost don't really feel like you're in it either.
Yeah.
And because there's so much of you're giving to your baby, and you're orienting so much to your baby's experience, you're not often even orienting to your own. Like, it's like your body is first in service before it's yours in that stage.
Totally.
Which can be really it can be really disorienting.
Yeah, and totally destabilizing on your sense of identity too, because if you don't have this surety or perceived, strength and place in the very vessel that carries you around, it's pretty hard to find your strength and place in the world. So I just think that's an incredibly vulnerable time which I think should have more delicate care taken of those women. And imagine if we looked at that space reverently rather than, I'm not enough here. I need to get back to the body that was, or I need to get out of this body that is. But instead that we were, you know, reverently held in that space of what our bodies had done and how they're looked after and revered and loved. You know, and I also think so many women I know then go on to struggle for years with their sexuality because of how much their bodies have changed.
And they haven't actually been able to integrate and love that changed body.
Exactly. Yeah.
It shows up in intimacy.
Yeah, totally, right? It can show up as pain during intercourse. It can show up as extreme body shame. It can show up as, you are not allowed to touch my belly because I'm in recoil. You know, my vagina is not okay. I have these scars. I don't like so many things that shut down your capacity to open and be expansive and connected in the future lovemaking with your partner. So there's this huge, like, just change that often is incredibly hard to reconcile and integrate. And what I see is, because we do this so poorly as a society, that it often isn't, which I know we'll talk about next. So then on top of that, you have life change. So we've got psyche changes, body changes, physiology changes, reminding. We also have life changes. Your life has just changed and will never be the same again. Ever. You can't go back. It's never going to be the same again. That's how you know it's the rite of passage. A rite of passage says there's this line, you've crossed over it, it's never going to be the same. So we need to honor the fact that there's a huge amount of emotional and identity processing that happens when you are faced with a life that that will never look the same, in a body that will never feel the same, and in a psyche that potentially won't know how to feel the same.
And that's looking, I think, for something to anchor, or you know, something to clutch onto, right? And so if we don't have a process or some way to navigate that, then we latch onto what our culture tells us we need to be, which is one of the greatest tragedies to our sense of self. And, you know, we see this with our children. If they don't have an adequate rite of passage through the teenage years, then they will totally attach to what our culture says is hot or sexy or desirable or who you should be. Right. And the same thing goes for women and for mothers. And, you know, I even wrote a post today like that in social media can be our greatest inspiration or our greatest kryptonite, depending on what your fetus looks like, because it could be the very thing that undoes you and leaves you broken because you're not who you think you should be, or it could be the very thing that carries you through a rite of passage if it's, you know, curated in a way that's honoring and nurturing, right?
Yeah, totally. You can curate your social media. It should feel good when you open up your phone, not spiral you into self-minimization. Then on top of that, there's relationship changes. So the relationships that you've held up until this point also will never be the same again. The relationship with your intimate lover has changed and will continue to change forever. The relationships with your parents, the relationships with your friends, the relationships with your colleagues, the relationships with your, who knows, neighborhood friends, I don't know. Relationships change because there's a shifting in priorities. There's a shifting in values. There's often a returning to past wounds and hurts that can create resentments and triggers and frustrations that arise within those relationships. And those relationships that used to be deeply nourishing, that were based on a set of rules pre this experience, and now those rules have changed because your life and needs have changed. Sometimes those rules don't fit that friendship anymore. / relationship. So that's also part of why it can feel so isolating, is because everything is up for negotiation. Everything gets thrown topsy-turvy. I often think of it like one of those, you remember those old school sand, like flip frames that used to be in the water?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You know, and you used to like flip them over and it'd be like a desert storm, and then it'd slowly settle into these beautiful like mountain peaks or whatever. I often think of it like that, in terms of you just get flipped and you're in the sandstorm and you have to, there's almost like this distillation while everything settles into a new identity, reality, step forwards, and then you can navigate the landscape when you can see it. But it's about this shaky part, right? Is how, what we're talking about is the sandstorm. How do we help you integrate and see with better clarity and create those mountains with a sense of intentionality, rather than feeling like you're blown in the wind by them?
And too, I mean, like, that's the difference between being able to find more ease in it is, how can I find a way to allow this to happen, you know, to allow this shaky ground to be here, to allow this transformation to be here, without doing everything that my prior identity or my personas, that aren't really me, but that it's who I'm attached to, without them coming up in a destructive way to try to clutch onto who I've been, or what I've established myself as, or how things used to be, and cause chaos, which is really just delaying the inevitable, which is your transformation.
Yeah. So motherhood is a rite of passage because it compels you, or allows you, to let go of who you were, and opens you up into unlocking the deeper mysteries that are available to you to access when you go through a rite of passage and you expand who you are, the consciousness that you are, and what you can know, see, feel, touch, taste, and expand into in this universe, right? It unlocks mysteries every time you walk through one of those passages. Otherwise, your world stays as small as the reality that you keep it in, right?
Yeah.
Versus each time you unlock deeper mysteries. So we hope that we've given you a run through of why your experience of motherhood and transition into it, regardless of how many times that is, because with each child comes all of this again. So it's a rite of passage every time, including pregnancy loss and child loss. So every single time you're going through this process of a rite of passage, it requires attending and a convalescence awareness, I would say. So let's just assume we do what the vast majority of our culture does, which is move through a rite of passage in an unintegrated and unsupported way. What does that look like?
Messy, full of blame,
insecurity,
anxiety.
Yeah.
Looking for things outside of yourself to make yourself okay. Trying to control with obsession the controllables, you know, like a nursery, or, you know, the baby's clothes.
Yeah, totally. Sleep patterns, feeding patterns.
Yeah. The gadgets.
Yeah.
The birth. Scheduling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So hard, isn't it?
And I also have the deepest compassion for that, because I can see, you know, insidious ways where that's kind of things played out in my psychology too.
Oh my gosh, me too. And when you're up on shaky ground, your survival instinct kicks in and you look for what you can control to hold on to safety.
Yeah.
But the tighter we grip to control, in actual fact, the more out of control we feel.
Yeah.
Like under the gripping so tightly to control is this intense experience of being out of control and not knowing how to be there. So that's why you can have a huge amount of compassion for it, is because that's a fucking scary place to be.
And, you know, our brains are wired to seek control. So like one of the 4 threats that our brain perceives is feeling out of control. And so part of navigating, if we were to move on to how you would navigate a rite of passage, would be to how to create safety, i.e., a perception of control for yourself to allow yourself to move in an integrated way through that transition.
What does that mean exactly? Can you break that down?
Well, I'm thinking about, you know, the ways in which you and I facilitate rites of passage, which is creating a space where it says, this will hold you so that you can unbecome.
It's so true, because where else can you?
No.
You can't as a mum, because you've got someone you've got to look after.
Yeah. And it feels incredibly unsafe to try to do that and hold at the same time.
Totally.
Or ask a partner who's going through their own rite of passage and possibly quite unintegrated. Asking them to hold can be almost impossible, because you can't both, like, you need to take it in turns, essentially, for you to each integrate and transition in a way that allows both of your wholeness. To have two people unraveling at a rapid rate is really hard to find any stability through. And that's why we need to seek those around us who can support us through that.
Yeah, because it's a lot on any one human, isn't it?
Yeah. It's huge. And I mean, you and I talking before we started recording about, you know, being in lockdown and this nuclear experience that we're having, which is so unnatural and is not allowing for that rite of passage to take place. You know, so many families going through enormous transition, you know, at a time of great fear, instability, and then without community. It's a vulnerable place to be.
It absolutely is. Yeah, absolutely is. We're just interrupting motherhood as a rite of passage to let you know what is open and available for you to jump into to deepen and expand at the moment. So what have you got going on, Bridgie?
Coming up, beginning on the 18th of October, is Disrupt, Revealing the Mother Wound, which is a beautiful 5-week immersive space with me, where we will take you on a transformative unraveling of your own mother imprint and the broader social and cultural imprint that we live and exist in as mothers, as a way to really empower your own mothering journey and find more ease, flow, and joy in your parenting. What about you, Jules?
And how do we find out about that?
Head over to bridgetwood.life.
And for the next 3 days, Sanctum, Safe, Sacred, and Sage-like Space for Facilitation and Creation is open for enrollment. So if you're looking at really wanting to deepen and expand how you hold women and create spaces of gathering and ceremony, rites of passage, and explorations into what else might be possible in the work that you do, go and check that out at julietenner.love. So the other one that I wanted to touch on here, perhaps if we just return to the unintegrated and unsupported outcomes, is also just a lack of willingness to receive help, just this self-sufficiency at the cost of all else, so that I'm the good enough mother, or I'm doing the right things and I'm running myself into the ground. Perhaps I don't have the boundaries to refill my own cup. I'm so stuck in the cycle of needing to serve and be devoted to the service of everyone else that I'm exhausted and depleted. And that often what comes out of that is a self-protection of, I can't say that I can't do this, or I don't know how to say I need help, or, you know, Joe down the street can do it, why can't I?
Yeah.
You know, all of this self-protection that comes up in that space that has no reverence for what you yourself as a human and a psyche are going through, nor the mother wounds that you come with.
Which might actually have deeply patterned that for you.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so the survival response is, I have to do everything for myself because otherwise I die, right? If we have an extreme experience growing up where we had to feed ourselves because, or our mother didn't, right? So that gets activated in a way that it potentially hasn't been activated for decades. So that also can add to burnout, to lack of intimacy, to feeling incredibly unsafe in the world, because you're now having to have those pieces of you come up to be seen and felt.
Yeah.
That you haven't maybe met for a long time, that have just been part of your personality, but you've not quite understood why until you're here going, oh, all right, this is familiar now. This is why.
It's such a lot we just leave women to do on their own.
Yes.
And on top of that is rearing of all old hurts, right? So there's the mother wound and the sister wound and the father wound and the brother wound.
Yeah.
All of these old hurts that by virtue of revisiting your own childhood through the age and stage of your child, you come up against I want to say against, that those old wounds and triggers revisited for you, old patterns that no longer serve you, that you're being asked again to shed and let go of this way of being and belonging, and perhaps clinging tightly onto this is the way I am in the world, or this is the way the world is. And no doubt your experience of motherhood will ask you to completely flip that and put it all up for negotiation. So we're revisiting all of these old hurts and wounds, and then we're coming crashing into essentially a nightmare that we were unaware of while we were running a projected future fantasy. Do you want to take us through what that is?
Yeah, so I love this. I love it. Love and loathe this kind of truth, this universal truth that, you know, the bigger the fantasy, the greater our experience of a nightmare. So if we have this fantasy on our motherhood being this, you know, deeply nourishing time, and that we're going to just love and adore being a mother, and it's going to feel beautiful and connected all the time, and we're going to, you know, effortlessly transition perhaps who we were to who we're becoming, and our relationship will thrive and we'll enjoy spending time with our children, like, you know, stack, Hallmark card after Hallmark card, right? Perfect mother myth, like everything, throw it all in, like, you know, and say that's what I want to be.
Tie it with a nice bow.
The less we examine, at the same time as all those ideals we might like, the less we examine the other side of each of those, which might be feeling resentful, feeling, you know, overwhelmed, having tricky parts in our relationship because we're having children. The less examined those things are, and the less recognized they are as part of a whole experience, the more challenge and pain they're going to bring up for us, because we've had an attachment to our success, or the right way being everything in column A and nothing of column B. So we're essentially attached to this one-sided experience of life. So the more that we seek ease, or the more that we seek for people to support us, the more that we are going to attract challenge and attract a sense of hardness and stuckness and constriction, because we're trying to avoid them. And by the very avoidance, we're inviting it. And so part of recognizing a transition that we're going through is recognizing, I guess, a little bit like labor, and a little bit like birth, and a little bit like those early weeks and months of sleeplessness, is there's going to be pain here. But that pain is purposeful. So I don't say I want to have a baby and just check out of, like, the experience of labor. Like, I know that the labor is setting me up for the experience of parenting this child, and I have to go through that. That is a rite of passage. For me to try and skip that is for me to try to have, like, I don't know, like, have the gold shiny thing at the end without doing the work to have that. It's part of the process. And so we also don't get a deep and intimate relationship without moving toward every little piece of us that wants to close, or wants to avoid, or wants to just shut down. Like the deeper connection, or the more expansive love is on the other side of every time I wanted to close.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. And I think it's a lot like aware parenting, is you never miss an opportunity, do you? So whatever you choose to bypass, you're just delaying. Like you can't escape pain and suffering. You just delay it. And because we're pleasure seeking, pain avoiding creatures, right? We choose what we perceive in this moment to be the lesser pain and the greater pleasure.
Yeah.
But in actual fact, it just keeps mounting and building until it was going to be the feather. Then it's the brick. Now you're getting the sledgehammer, because what you run from, you run into. And what you bury, buries you.
Yes.
Right? Like,
and it's, I mean,
you can't escape yourself.
It's brutal, right? Like, I mean, that's the reality of it. But I also think it is alchemy when we can go, I can't have one without the other.
Yeah. And I can see the beauty and how it's on the way, not in the way.
Yeah.
Totally.
And that ultimately comes from having the questions that we ask ourselves, so we can see that other side earlier, or that as we're going through something, see wider. Like, so for me, like with, Sylvie's birth, when I was really where I didn't want to be in hospital, if it was supposed to be a infant, how do I process this now rather than completely resisting this? How do I surrender to this in a way that makes it my own, not a deeply triggering event?
Yeah.
Or where I'm really struggling, how do I create community or some kind of container or some kind of transformational experience that helps me call all these pieces home for me now, so that I can take them all with me, and not only the parts of myself that I decide are okay or lovable or attractive, and shun everything else. Which I ultimately will meet in my children if I do that.
Yeah.
And my partner.
Yeah. I do think that's pretty hard to do on your own.
Oh,
well,
yeah.
Because you're asking yourself essentially to change or widen your perception of self-suffering current circumstances and open into a more expansive experience. But that requires an ability to look wider than the beliefs that you currently have that are currently creating your suffering in reality.
Yes. It's like kind of huge.
Yeah, and it's like somewhat counterintuitive as well, because I guess what we're saying is this is the reason why we enter spaces and places with other sages, guides, space holders, and experiences of deep gathering, so that we are opening ourselves into wider perceptions based on someone else facilitating us, and someone else who sees the world differently to us, opening our view and opening our eyes and opening our perceptions. It's pretty hard to open your own perceptions when you're stuck in the brain and perceptions that created them in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you said that, because it's true. Otherwise, we can end up just going round and round in circles in our own brain.
There's no benefits. I can't possibly imagine how this could be a benefit to me. There's no, this is da-da-da-da-da. You need to be facilitated through that. That's pretty hard to find on your own. So let's talk about then to round this experience of what it looks like to be unintegrated and unsupported as a rite of passage. I'd also say that rites of passage stack. So each time you enter a new rite of passage, anything that's unresolved also just comes along with you for baggage, for an extra ride through the next rite of passage, the next moment that you're opening. It just kind of amplifies it. So whatever is unresolved always finds its way another opportunity to heal. So if we continuously avoid those opportunities to heal, which is what we were saying before, or we just don't know, or we're unsupported and can't, then it just kind of stacks and gets harder and harder each time we enter a new rite of passage or / life entirely upheaved and everything up for renegotiation in whatever form that looks like. So a supported or integrated journey, I just want to riff on that a little bit, on what that would look like that's different to the unintegrated experience of motherhood as a rite of passage. So the first thing, then I'll shift to you, Bridgie, the first thing that comes up for me is just making your experience okay, worthy, and really normal, rather than thinking that you're abnormal, having an isolated experience, disconnected from self and other, unable to be authentic because there's all these things in the way blocking you or wrong with you, not able to reveal your true self or find your authentic next self because of all of those blocks towards all of the upheaval and change and intimacy and all of the things. So when I think about holding women with reverence through a rite of passage, it first and foremost looks like offering them a space and a map with a torch that says your grief, your isolation, your suffering, your fear, your difficulty integrating and like fully loving this new life is all really normal. So instead of trying to make any of those experiences wrong, because you have a healthy baby, you should be so happy. You're so blessed. So therefore, let's discount anything that's not that so that we don't have to listen to the suffering of women. It's a very patriarchal notion. Be quiet or you're hysterical.
Yes, God.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
So I really just love that a space that holds you through a rite of passage just looks at you and says, I see that grief. Yeah. It is okay to grieve who you were and the life that you had and grieve the way things, it's okay to be in grief. That's okay. It's like a death. It's like a funeral. We have to be willing to, before we can get to the point of celebrating that person's life that's just left us, we have to let ourselves move through the heartbreak that it is to lose them. So what does it look like to sit with the grief? And after the grief probably comes this feeling of complete isolation. Nobody gets me. I've had this experience that's been has completely and utterly changed me on a really real and on every level. And the rest of the world seems not to notice and to have just carried on with its business. And I can't reconcile those two. And I can't speak to my mum or my partner anymore. I can't speak to my best friend anymore. My experience seems so different to someone else's experience, so therefore I can't share it. And the isolation just sinks further and further in. And the more we don't recognize ourselves, the further we sink into isolation and the less we seek connection. And the more isolated we are. Like it just is a self-perpetuating cycle.
It reinforces itself and creates more hardness, often more disconnect.
Right. And the fear that it is to have left the safety of the cocoon, a home that you knew, it may have grown too small for you and it was uncomfortable, but it was the only home you'd known. And you don't really know when you take a step outside of there who you're going to be. You haven't seen your wings. You don't know what you look like. You don't know how you're going to walk. You certainly don't know how you're going to fly. So to not know who you are yet or how you be in the world yet, and yet to know with absolute certainty you're not who you were and you can't stay here because it's itchy and sore and it hurts. Like, that's fucking brutal. Of course you would fear that.
It's so brutal. Yeah.
So there's that. And then I also think once you move through or you're able to really complete those cycles of grief, isolation and fear that naturally occur within a rite of passage, it's really normal, would be this phase of integration where, okay, no, I've accepted who I am. I'm starting to get a grip on this new life, new reality, new me. But it is like this yo-yo between it feels like me, this doesn't feel like me at all. It fits me, it doesn't fit me at all. And there's like this.
I want to wear this coat. I don't want to wear this coat.
Yeah. I love this human. No, I really don't want to be in love with this human. You know, like it's just, I mean, we're both giggling because one, we both recognize that in ourselves. And two, we have the deepest compassion for how confusing and disorienting that is as an experience.
And also too, because in our culture we're also celebrated for our certainty and we're patted on our head for what we know, and the linear path and where we're going is really what everybody wants to put their attention on. Whereas the messiness and the not knowing and the disheveled, you know, crawling through the darkness as you try to find who you are, that's all in shadow, right? So we're also trying to find our place in the world and be seen in that. And it's not really held up as any kind of measure of success, which further, you know, contributes to our shame.
Yeah, totally, totally. So what else does it look like? It looks like a grounded, authentic and embodied way of being belonging in the world, not having to rush to your own defense or justify who you are or the choices that you make. It's an open-hearted space of, I know with certainty that I love the choices that I'm making because they're not in reaction to my mother wound. So therefore it's actually an authentic choice, not a reaction. And I don't have to defend them from attack because there's part of me that's really uncertain and fearful. I can love you and your experience because I love you and your experience. But that doesn't mean I love me and my experience any less. So it looks like an integration of love, I think.
And that pairs of opposites can exist without one needing to be better than the other.
Yeah. I think it looks like an expansion of self that at some point, probably between the 9 and 12 month mark postpartum, you start to fall in love with. And you get that rush of, it might at first only be a flutter or an occasional wave, but you start to get that wave of, I can see the world differently. I am different. And you start to get that excited kind of, I'm moving, I'm expanding. Like, that's a beautiful feeling.
It is. It's almost like the world's like in Technicolor.
Yeah.
Everything's it reminds me of the book, The Celestine Prophecy, where like you can actually see everything vibrating. It's like everything is kind of come alive to the world again.
Yeah. Totes. God, I read that book when I was like 14 and fucking loved it.
Yeah, I haven't read it for so long and I really want to read it again.
Yeah, it's so funny you said that to me. You're like the third person that said it to me in like a week, just randomly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm like, okay.
Need to reread.
Yeah, need to reread. And I would say that it looks like someone who is comfortable with their new identity and who finds that stepping into their new identity more easeful, because they're not struggling to reconcile who they are and they're not struggling to go back to who they were.
Yeah. They're okay in the transition. Yeah. And in being in that place. Sometimes of not knowing and being comfortable with the not knowing.
But a finding of self and authenticity. So I really hope that through this, you have gained an enormous reverence for yourself and the transitions that you have made in your lifetime. I'm sure a number of times, and that perhaps went unseen, unrecognized, unsupported, and had hangovers of lack of integration, and the deepest compassion for how that complicated the experiences that you had leading into that new identity. And what does it look like to create a different framework for the women of the future and for ourselves, because we will continue to move through rites of passage until the day we die, which is our final rite of passage. So what does it look like to really build and construct a community and carve out a space where you can be deeply authentic in a way that is not safe in other areas of your life or possible? What does that look like to do? How do you find that? How do you create that if it doesn't exist? And you might be full of fear that, I couldn't possibly, and all these women who, and it's not part of their language. But every single person that I have met is always seeking to deepen their authentic self and to receive connection.
Yes. It's part of our innate human nature. I think we're all seeking that.
Yeah, me too. So if you're feeling called and you don't yet even fully tangibly know why, or you want to deepen it, then I invite you into Sanctum, which only is available for another 3 days. Enrollment closes on Thursday the 16th, and that's a 5-week journey with me where we move through and integrate what it looks like to have an integrated rite of passage, how you hold that and facilitate that for potentially groups of humans or women, what it looks like to hold space, safe, super safe, trauma-informed and responsive space, and what it looks like to create a business that feeds your life force, energy, and soul as much as it can actually be financial for you. So I really invite you to check that out at julietenner.love or on the socials.
That's a beautiful, beautiful offering. And if you feel called to really deepen your understanding and exploration of your own mother wound and the imprint that you've come with, then I really invite you to consider joining Disrupt, Revealing the Mother Wound, which begins on the 18th of October, which is a 4-week program, which will have a number of trainings and workbooks, circle and facilitation through the group. So it'll be a really beautiful, intimate space for you to go on more of your own journey of integration.
I was looking at your post today. What are the modules? What do you know? What the kind of overarching?
Yeah, you put me on the spot.
Yeah, sorry, only because I was literally reading your post today, going, "Oh, yeah, that's a beautiful flow through the transition of working out what your wound is, how it's impacting you, and how you heal it."
Yeah, so it's mapping your own wound. So that's uncoil. So to understand what that looks like and how that shows up in you, and then it's understanding the broader sociological imprint that we all come with, whether we're conscious of it or not, because our motherhood is socially and culturally created. It's not just something that we experience in isolation. And so after those 2 modules, we then journey on to the next one, which I thought I would open up and remember what it's called because it's completely left my brain right now. The next one is Anchor, which is the family dynamic, and then your own inner mother. So looking at your own family dynamic and how your mothering is or isn't valued in your family dynamic, and how you can enrich and cultivate your own inner mother, because so often we will seek the outer mother for what we can't hold within ourselves. And each child we have, each rite of passage we go through, that edge gets tested. And so it's asking us to both be open to the outer resourcing, but resource within ourselves. And then finally, it's artful. So repatterning the imprint for more connection and freedom. So practical embodiment practices to repattern that within you. And then also how to do that in relationship with your child, because our children are always offering us opportunity to heal with them. And being able to do that is a really, really beautiful way to deepen our intimacy with our kids and also love mothering more, which is what we all want, right? So yeah, that's the flow.
It's really beautiful.
Thanks.
I'm hearing you talk about
it. That at bridgetwood.life.
Yeah, thank you. So we love to hear how you enjoyed this podcast, what you got from it, what your key learnings, insights, or takeaways were. We would love to hear from you if there's questions we can answer, discussions you'd love us to have, or questions you would love us to answer. So please reach out to either Bridget or myself on socials. You can send us emails through our private accounts, or you can go on to Nourishing the Mother on Facebook or Instagram and send us a message through there. And we would love to hear from you, and we would love the opportunity to meet the conversation exactly where you're at.
We would. Remember to nourish the woman, to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
Thank you so much for listening. We literally couldn't do this without you. Please share this podcast with anyone you think it would be medicine for.
If you desire to integrate your learnings practically and supportively into your life, then head on over to bridgetwood.life or julietenner.love to go deeper.
And if you feel like giving back a little to this free content, please rate us on iTunes or Facebook, all of which helps the podcast reach more mamas who need this type of tonic for the soul.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.